This is the first contract you're going to sign if you're looking at purchasing a home here in Utah in 2026. And I'm not talking about the home purchase contract. I'm talking about a buyer broker agreement. Now, if you are a first-time home buyer or you haven't purchased a home in a while, this video is going to break down for you some of the highlights of a buyer broker agreement and understand why you have to sign it before you can ever look at houses with an agent. Now, if you walk into an open house, that's a little bit different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual one-on-one showing of properties with an agent. So let's jump into it so you get a better understanding of what you're signing. Like I said, the buyer broker agreement is the first thing you're going to sign when it comes time to purchasing a home here in Utah. And I'm not going to talk about the contract line by line. I'm going to talk about the highlights so you kind of have an overview and the really important things to know and understand about the buyer broker agreement. So, first things first, most people know about the NAR, National Association of Realtors lawsuit that took place a couple of years ago. And when that happened, they kind of shifted the focus of the buyer broker agreement. It was always kind of this way, but now there's just more strict guidelines around it. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if you call a real estate agent and you say, hey, I want to start looking for my first home, as an agent, we have to sign what's called a buyer broker agreement before we ever show you homes. Like I said, that was always kind of the case, but it slid under the radar for most agents. It was kind of like, yeah, we'll do it later. But now when we book the appointments, we have to acknowledge as agents that we have this contract, this buyer broker agreement signed with the person we're showing this house to. As I said, if you're going to open houses, if you're going to model homes, this does not apply to that. Anybody can walk into a model home or an open house and they will be shown around because the agent is there representing the seller. Their brokerage is there representing the seller, and it is in the seller's best interest to get their home sold. So don't worry if you are one of those people that just wants to hit open houses when they're open, or you're only looking for new construction. I still recommend that you have your own buyer's agent, but that's a whole different video. So with this buyer broker agreement, section 1, a lot of people get this confused when I talk to them. And I'm going to put a screenshot up of section 1 so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This is after the section where it has you as the buyer's name, your agent's name, brokerage, all of that. So section 1, the first thing is the date that this contract is going to expire. So you'll notice on here, it doesn't necessarily say for 6 months or a year or anything like that. That is negotiable between you and the buyer's agent. So I have talked to people who are like, oh, I thought I had to sign this for 6 months. No, technically you could do 30 days. I think that's too short of a time frame, especially because some loans will take 3 to 4 weeks plus time to find a property and get it under contract. But in theory, you could do it for 30 days even. The second part, section 1.2, you'll notice it can be per county that you are in this buyer agency agreement, or it can be specific properties. So the date may be for the next 3 months, but it only covers 1 property or 2 properties. So again, it's not a blanket all or nothing type of contract. You do have options to negotiate with the buyer's agent on the terms that you are comfortable with. Now, if you work with an agent that you're really comfortable with, that you don't want to work with anybody else, by all means, sign a 6-month contract if you're happy with that and put every county you're looking at. I'm just letting you know you have the option if you want to, because a lot of first-time home buyers are very confused by that. Okay, section 2, that is another huge part. So when the NAR lawsuit happened, what they did was they uncoupled compensation for real estate agents. It used to be that when a listing was taken by a seller's brokerage, they negotiated a rate that the seller would pay and the agents would split that, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. That didn't necessarily mean 50-50, but they would split it. Now that they're uncoupled, they say, seller, you're responsible for compensating your agent for the work they do. Buyer, you're responsible for compensating your agent for what they do. So this portion talks about what the buyer's agent compensation will be. You'll see here that it does say either a flat dollar amount or a percentage. Now, the interesting thing that happened is, let's say, for instance, that you and I get into an agreement and we put on here that you are going to be responsible for my fee of $10,000. Just throwing a number out there. Usually it's going to be a percentage. So, but I'm just trying to work with even numbers. If we say $10,000, so in section 2.2 of this, it does say that as a buyer's agent, we can negotiate our compensation and ask the seller to pay for it. So very much like it used to be, it's just uncoupled now. It's not a given. So you and I agree that you will pay me $10,000 to help you find a house, do the contract, look out for your best interest, because that's what this agreement is. This is our fiduciary duty to you as our client. So it's a pretty serious contract for us and what we do for our clients. So you will want to talk with your agent about that section and make sure you're comfortable with what you sign, because on the flip side, let's say that you agree to $10,000, but the seller says, no, I'm only willing to pay $5,000 towards your buyer agent, then you are technically on the hook to pay the buyer's agent that other $5,000, because this contract says you will compensate your agent $10,000. So keep that in mind. Very important section on this. Okay, the next section, section 4 of the buyer broker agreement, talks about what you as a buyer agree to as far as once you've entered into a buyer broker agreement, if you speak to another agent, you will disclose to another agent that you do have a buyer broker agreement with another agent. That way, no agent is put in kind of an unethical situation where it's assumed you don't have this fiduciary duty contract with an agent and another agent starts working with you, because we are not allowed to do that. So you agree to that term. It also talks about when you do the buyer due diligence that you're going to have a wire fraud disclosure, which is a huge problem. It's getting a little bit better and it's not quite as bad as it used to be, but I have heard of one recently that was wire fraud, trying to scam people out of their whole down payment. So that's a very important part that you really need to discuss with your agent. And that there's something called a buyer's due diligence checklist that you will get with it as well. And so you're signing saying you will read those and sign those. And it talks about how as an agent, we will help you find and acquire a property. Then section 5 is the agency disclosure. And that's where I was talking about my duties as your agent and what I do for you. Like I said, we do have a fiduciary duty to our clients. And there's also something in this section called a limited agency section. And that goes further into detail about what a limited agency means. So this is where it's really important to understand what you're signing. So let's say you go into a house and the listing agent is there and you say, I just want to put in an offer with you. I don't have my own agent. None of that. Well, that means that they are a limited agent. Now, this could be agent specific or brokerage. And it really limits what an agent can do for you, because now you have to be, you, meaning me as an agent, have to be neutral, and you can't act in the best interest of one party over another. Whereas our fiduciary duty, if it's exclusive and not limited, we have to act in your best interest. So if we know a material fact, not that we're going to know this, but let's just say for ease that as a buyer's agent, I'm told, hey, the seller is willing to take X amount of money, and that's $50,000 off the list price. I would be obligated to go back to you as my buyer client and say, hey, guess what? We can get $50,000 off the list price. The seller will take a low offer of $50,000 less than what it's listed for. Whereas with a limited agency, that may not be disclosed to you, and that's a pretty big deal. So you really need to know and have an in-depth conversation with exclusive versus limited agency. Okay, and then another section is the professional advice as an agent. We are licensed to sell and market real estate. We are not inspectors. We are not contractors. We cannot give you legal advice, tax advice. That all has to be outsourced. If something is important to you, like tax implications, you need to talk to a tax professional. As an agent, we are not trained in that, and we cannot give you that type of advice. Same is true for the condition of the home. That's why you have home inspections that you do. I'm not a roofer. I can't tell you the condition of a roof on a property. So things like that are also covered in here. Professional advice, you need to go outside of your buyer's agent if it's outside the realm of buying or selling a home or marketing a home. And then it gets into kind of those legal terms as far as if there's a dispute, if you will mediate and would be required to mediate, or it is an option of the parties. So kind of that legal fine print, we like to say. The attorney's fees and how that works is in the buyer broker agreement if there's a dispute between you and your agent. And then there's some buyer authorizations, and that includes your buyer's agent communicating with you before, during, and after the sale of the home that you purchase. That as agents, we will report it to our local MLS that we participate in. Now, Utah is a non-disclosure state, so unless you're an agent or an appraiser, somebody that has the back end access to the MLS, nobody's going to know what you pay for your house, but we do report that as agents, and you're authorizing us to do that. And then there is an option on here, and it's either checked there are or are not addendums to this agreement. So an addendum could be anything that you and your agent agree to outside of this. So, that could be, I've done one where somebody reached out to me, but they had already been talking to a model home agent. And so on our addendum, we excluded if the person purchased that model home, I would not be any part of that. So that was on an addendum. Things like that can go on there. Addendums aren't always very common, but they can happen. And then equal housing, that we as agents and buyers agree to all the federal laws for fair housing, no discrimination, things like that. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what to expect on this first contract that you're going to sign when it comes time to buying a home. If you are looking at making a real estate move, I'd love to connect with you. Shoot me a text or give me a call. That is the best way to reach me. But as always, make it a great day.